This is True Crime Out Loud.
I'm your host, B.
And I'm your host, Jen.
And I'm your co-host, Chad.
Our guest host this week, Chad, is a self-described super fan of True Crime Out Loud, and we often use him as a sounding board for some of our cases and case ideas that we present. He grew up near where this week's case took place, so we asked him to join us in presenting this case. With that, let's get into the case.
As B said, I was born near Brentwood, Tennessee. I have been a super fan of the podcast since it came out. Honestly, I've been begging them to get on and share a little bit of my opinions with them, and finally have been invited on the show, and I'm really glad that they have let me sit in today to tell the story with you guys. So now let me tell you a little bit about the city of Brentwood, Tennessee. It's a suburb of Nashville, near the Nashville metro area. It's an upscale community with higher end homes. The average home price ranged at about $625,000 in 2010. The population is around 43,000. Mavoto ranked it the 7th wealthiest small town in the United States. Less than 2% of the people there are below the poverty line. There are many celebrities that have homes in Brentwood, Tennessee. Just to name a few: Dolly Parton, Tim McGraw, Faith Hill, Sheryl Crow. That's just a few of them. There is a big country music influence in the Brentwood, Tennessee area.
And so what you were telling me is that Brentwood's kind of where the people who were in Nashville to make and create music moved to Brentwood instead of living in Nashville a lot of times.
Yes, that is true.
Well, let's talk about the people involved in this case this week. First of all, we have 44-year-old Jeffrey Freeman and his 41-year-old wife, Martha Freeman. And the Freemans had built their own business in Brentwood. It was called Resifax. And what Resifax does, or did, was background checks for employers and other businesses. They started this business in their home, and it became so successful that they moved into their own office space, and Jeffrey was able to quit his full-time job. Now, their home was located at 5424 Incline Drive in Brentwood, Tennessee. And it's a very nice home with close to 3,000 square feet. In 2004, when this case took place, the Freemans had already been married for 10 years. So now I want to talk about this summer of 2004. Martha and Jeffrey were having some marital issues, and she moved out of their home. And she was living at an extended stay hotel in Brentwood. And these are those hotels where you can go and they usually have a kitchenette and the ability to cook inside of them. And some people live in them long term. On July 4th of 2004, Martha had gone to a fireworks show. While at that show, she met 3 younger Hispanic men. Martha and the men decided they were going to party together, so she took the men to a hotel in downtown Nashville to continue the party. And that night, she admittedly had a physical relationship with all 3 men. But it did not end there. She continued to see one of these men, 36-year-old Rafael de Jesus Roca Perez.
So let me give you a little background on Rafael Roca Perez. He was an illegal immigrant from Mexico, and he didn't speak any English. And Martha had always called him by the name of Christian. And as Jen always says, I'm sure that's what we'll refer to him as for the rest of this podcast.
Yes, we will. So I want to talk about the relationship. Martha and Christian continued their relationship from July of 2004 until December of 2004. And he even moved in and stayed with her at the extended stay in Brentwood. We also know that on December 29th of 2004, Jeffrey had spoke with an attorney, and this was a divorce attorney. He was wanting to know his options. Also in December, Martha and Jeffrey's friend came to the extended stay. Now, this friend's name is Tony Cantrell, and Tony was called to the extended stay by Martha. She wanted Tony to help Christian move out of the hotel and move him into an apartment in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And according to Cantrell, he was under the impression the relationship had ended between Martha and Christian. Well, Martha and Jeffrey start back talking and trying to work on things, and she ended up moving back into their marital home in late January of 2005. However, Jeffrey slept in the master bedroom and Martha stayed in a guest bedroom. I guess they were trying to work on things, but they were wanting to have separate beds and kind of take it slow in repairing the relationship.
All right, let's jump forward to April 11th, 2004. Around 4 p.m., Martha went to her neighbor's home and asked them to call 911 because someone had killed her husband. The neighbor obviously called 911 to report the crime. According to the neighbor, Martha actually seemed to be in a pretty big state of shock. And then the police arrived on the scene.
Yeah, and once the police arrived, they say Martha was excited, agitated, crying, and basically hysterical. They asked if it had happened about 20 to 30 minutes ago, and she shook her head yes. And when they asked who did it, she reported that Christian had committed the crime. So the police enter the home, and they find the body of Jeffrey Freeman in the master bathroom. Here's how they found him. He was wet and inside a sleeping bag lying on his stomach on the bathroom floor. His head was wrapped in black plastic, which was tied and taped. They said there was no blood except for the area underneath the bags around his head, which could have been blood or where a little bit of blood got mixed with water. They found evidence of a cleanup. They found trash bags, and in these trash bags, there was a wet pillowcase, a wet bath mat, latex gloves, and a phone cord. So, of course, they recover all this. Not to say that this isn't a normal murder, but usually when you walk into a murder scene, you're not going to see these things that they saw inside a sleeping bag, head wrapped in plastic and tied and taped. It's just a very unusual homicide scene. In the search of the residence, the detectives also found a prescription bottle for hydrocodone that was filled on April 10th. Now remember, April 11th is when the police were called. So the prescription was filled on the 10th, but it was empty, and they weren't able to find any loose pills in the home. So that was something very strange. Also, they found a beach towel, which was spread out on the living room floor, and they collected that. A resident in the neighborhood alerted police when they saw him arrive and said they saw a Hispanic male running through the neighborhood at about 3:45 p.m. and saw him enter a house that was under construction. So remember, they see him running at 3:45. Martha goes to the neighbors at 4. So just before Martha goes over is when they see this man. The neighbor, her name's Karen Kirby, said she recognized this man and she wasn't sure of his name, but she had seen him frequently at the Freeman home. The police go to this home that's under construction and they search it, and it took them a while, but they found Christian. And he was hiding in the attic rafters, and they found him around 6:20 p.m. He was arrested for the murder of Jeffrey Freeman. On that same day, Martha voluntarily went to the police department where she answered questions, and then the police take her back home where they do a videotaped walkthrough of the crime, which is used a lot just to get a recreation of here's what happened, here's what I saw, so they can kind of piece together to see how the evidence fits within that. On April 12th, the day after, the medical examiner does an autopsy. And here's what we've got from him. Jeffrey Freeman was about 5'7", about 231 pounds. He had been in the position on his stomach for at least 8 hours after death. The marks on his wrist that indicated he was bound had been there when he was alive because he had struggled against the restraints and it had created these marks. He had 4 to 7 blows to his head, bruising to his face from being struck. But the cause of death? Strangulation. The estimate was that he died about 16 to 18 hours before Martha went to the neighbors to call 911. So it is hard for a medical examiner to determine exact time of death. So rough estimate, like I said, 16 to 18 hours, give or take some time. But it was not the 20 to 30 minutes that Martha claimed.
So the first step in most trials is going to be a preliminary hearing. And Christian, Mr. Roca Perez, had a preliminary hearing. Basically, a preliminary hearing is a court function to determine if there's enough evidence to proceed to trial with the case. And most of the time now, it's a formality. Usually a case isn't brought unless there's enough evidence to proceed to trial. So Martha testified at the hearing, and she claimed that on the night of Sunday, April 10th, 2005, she and Christian were asleep in her room when Jeffrey discovered them.
So she's asleep in her room.
And he finds them. And he supposedly found them, according to her, he found them because Christian was snoring, and he heard that. So Jeffrey's obviously going to be very upset at discovering this, and he told Martha to get Christian out of the house. And then Jeffrey left to take the dogs out for a walk. I guess he just needed to cool down a little bit, according to her. Now, Martha claims that when Jeffrey returned, Christian grabbed Jeffrey by his shirt collar, pointed a gun at him, and forced him into the bathroom. Martha claims that she waited outside the bathroom where she heard water running and a lot of thumping noises. She made the statement, "I was terrified of what was going on, and also, if he could have done this to my husband, I'm not sure what he was going to do to me." Now, naturally, she was asked why she didn't call police immediately, and she was unable to provide an answer. She did kind of allude to the fact that she's on medication for bipolar disorder and kind of attributed it to that. She said that at 4 p.m. the next day, she went to the neighbor's home to get help. But the judge stopped her testimony. The judge didn't believe her, and he wasn't tolerating anything that he perceived as not being true testimony. In fact, he said, "I've got a problem with allowing this to go any further without allowing her some representation because I can see her being charged in this case." So the judge is not sure at all that she is not directly involved, and he stops the proceeding so that her constitutional rights are observed. And this is a very, very bad sign for Martha.
So instead of just taking Martha's word at this point, and with the judge having to point it out, they look further into the background of Martha Freeman. And what they find is almost unreal. After moving back into the home with Jeffrey, Martha rekindled her relationship with Christian. And what she did was move him into the home without Jeffrey's knowledge.
I don't even know what to say. So at this point, she's moved Christian into her house, and her husband's sleeping in another room down the hall without him knowing.
Yeah.
Wow.
But the reason Jeffrey didn't know is because Christian lived in the closet of Martha's bedroom. Remember, she was in the guest bedroom. And he would hang out in the closet until Jeffrey was gone. Jeffrey worked long hours, and so Christian was able to come out, and he and Martha did as they pleased. And then at night, a lot of times, he would go back into the closet. They estimate Jeffrey was killed between 6 p.m. on April 10th, but before 2 a.m. on April 11th. Now, remember I said trying to get an exact time of death, they have to look at other factors other than, taking temperature readings of the room and checking body temperature. They take into account circumstances. They look at the last time he was seen alive and try to piece together. So that's the best estimate they have. But during this time, they discovered that Martha had gone out by herself on 2 separate times to take the dogs for a walk. No calling the police. On April 11th, a neighbor saw her on her porch that morning smoking a cigarette alone. We also know that Martha had gone to the pharmacy. Remember that hydrocodone bottle? She had gone to get the prescription filled. So that Sunday night at 11 p.m. on April 10th, Martha called Jeffrey's mother to tell her that Jeffrey wouldn't be having their usual call that night because he was ill. So this is something the mother expected. Martha knew the mother was expecting it, so she called and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Jeffrey's ill. He won't be calling you tonight. I'm just going to let you know." Jeffrey's mother, Hazel, said Martha sounded calm and normal, and she didn't think anything was out of the way. Martha also called Resifax, their business, on the morning of April 11th around 8 a.m. and told the employee that Jeffrey was feeling ill and would not be coming into work. And the employee said she sounded normal. So after looking at all these factors, 4 months later, August 2005, a grand jury indicted Martha for the first-degree murder of Jeffrey Freeman. So at the trial, here's what the prosecution presented. They said that Roca Perez, or Christian, had lived in the closet for about a month before he was discovered. In that closet, which was about 2 feet by 8 feet, so it was a decent-sized closet, they found a Spanish-English translator. Remember, Christian didn't speak English. They found clothing belonging to Christian. They found provocative pictures. They found a foam pad, pillows, 3 loaves of bread, a Nintendo Game Boy, a radio, and adult magazines. So they also determined that the body at one point had been in the tub, which is how it got wet, and then it was moved. And they said due to Jeffrey's size, it would have taken both of them to move his body out of that tub with him being wet. They believe that a shotgun, which was found in the home, is what was used to force Jeffrey into compliance. The neighbor that she went to make the 911 call said she seemed panicky and maybe in a state of shock, but then a short time later she was calm. It's kind of like her emotions were all over the place.
Or maybe she was acting.
That is a possibility. So the beach towel that was found spread out on the den floor that just really looked out of place, they tested it, and it had a mixture of Martha's DNA and semen from Christian. So what they are thinking happened is that after murdering Jeffrey, that Martha and Christian had sex on the den floor, or they think that Jeffrey might have caught them having sex. But to me, if he's hiding in the closet and she knows he's home, I don't think they're going to be in the den having sex. I think that's probably going to take place in the bedroom or in the closet. But they also note that there was a cleanup done to eliminate blood and fingerprints. Now, the defense for Martha, they said that she was on a number of narcotics and medications for mental illness, and her prescription history, which they were able to get, showed medications for anxiety, insomnia, 2 for depression, blood pressure, 2 for pain, cholesterol, allergy, birth control patches, but nothing for bipolar, which is what she had claimed, that she was bipolar. Her defense presented that only Christian was strong enough to strangle a 231-pound man, and Martha couldn't have done it. And they said, in her defense, she did report the crime, and if she was involved, she would have helped to cover it up instead of reporting it. Martha didn't deny adultery, and the defense pointed out, hey, she may not be a good person. She was cheating on her husband. She had a man living in the closet, but she's not on trial for adultery. Christian ran from the home because he's illegal and he did not want to be deported. But a group of Hispanic bricklayers pooled their money together to help pay for his defense because, he was indigent at this point and he couldn't afford his own counsel. Christian's defense, it wasn't him. He did not know who killed Jeffrey, but believes that Martha was involved and she set him up.
So he's claiming that he wasn't even there or wasn't involved at all. That's what his defense is claiming.
Yes, that's what he's claiming, but he thinks Martha set him up. So the jury didn't believe either one of them, and both of them were found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. And in Tennessee, you have to serve 51 years of a life sentence before you're eligible for parole. And that's a long time compared to a lot of other states where it may be 15 years or 20 years. 51 years is a long time. Jeffrey's parents filed a $10 million wrongful death suit against both offenders. And to this day, Martha still maintains she was not involved and it was only Christian that did it. So Martha has filed appeals based on ineffective counsel, saying she was offered a deal of 20 years in return for her testimony against Christian, but she said she was advised by her attorney not to take it and instead to go to trial. If she had done that, she would have been eligible for parole in 6 years. She also filed an appeal because they did not sever her trial and Christian's trial. Her last appeal was June of 2020, and every one of her appeals have been denied. Now, while this is a very unusual case, it's probably not as rare as you think. And I was able to pull up some other instances that were similar to this case. They don't involve homicide, but they were similar, and I want to go into those.
2012 in South Carolina, a woman called police about someone possibly in her attic. And come to find out, when police get there, it was actually the ex-boyfriend of the woman who she had broken up with 12 years earlier. But he had recently gotten out of prison, and I guess he just found himself a home right there in the attic of her house.
Yeah, well, in 2014, a 27-year-old man was found living in a 14-year-old girl's closet. And they had met online, and he had been there for about a week when her parents discovered it.
I will be checking my girls' closets when I get home after hearing this story.
No kidding.
And in 2019, a North Carolina college student said she thought she had a ghost in her apartment. She would report that things were moved around and misplaced, and one day she heard a noise in the closet, and it sounded like a raccoon. She kind of just shouted out, I guess she was scared, and said, "Hey, who's there?" And someone answered, and they said, "Me? Oh, my name is Drew." She opened the door and found a man in her closet wearing her clothes. She called police, but kept the man occupied by having him try on different hats. This is 30-year-old Andrew Swafford, and he was arrested. He was compliant and not violent, and the police believe that he entered her home through an unlocked window.
And it was not just that day. It had been going on. She thought that there had been a ghost in there making these things move because they knew everything was secured, but at some point he had come in.
And then in 2019, in Mount Juliet, Tennessee, which is very close to Brentwood, Tennessee, a woman comes home and sees a man standing at the top of her stairs. And of course, she yelled, and then he ran off into her daughter's room to hide. Police arrived on the scene shortly after, and an 18-year-old man was discovered living in the family's attic space above their 14-year-old daughter's bedroom. He was not compliant and had to be tased. This was the boyfriend of the juvenile.
So I have two more of these similar cases, but I just could not leave these out. One of them occurred in 2020. A couple in Florida found a 36-year-old man living in the closet of their 15-year-old daughter's room, and they heard a noise coming from the closet and went to investigate. Jonathan Rossmond of Louisiana was arrested. Now, he had met their juvenile daughter about 2 years earlier in a chat app when she was only 13. Now, he's 36 now and she's 15, so when he was 34 and she was 13. She had told him that she was 18, but before he came to Florida, she admitted her true age to him, but he didn't have a problem with this. He had been living in the closet on and off for several months. He would come out when the parents left for work, and he had his van, which was parked down the street from the home. And, of course, it was confirmed that he was having a sexual relationship with their daughter, and he was arrested. But this case, it comes from Japan, and it is in 2008. A 57-year-old man, he lived alone, and he noticed things were going missing from his refrigerator. And he thought that somebody was coming in just to get the food, so he would make double sure that doors and windows were secure, but things still kept going missing. Well, he then thought that maybe he was sleepwalking and doing it himself, or he might be going crazy. So he set up cameras. He saw a woman go into the fridge, help herself to food, go sit on the couch, and watch TV. And then she cleaned up after herself. So he calls the police, right? Well, they get there and they could not find a suspect initially. And he's like, I'm telling you what I saw. I'm not, look, here's what I've got. And they're like, yeah, okay, that's a woman. So they continue to search for the suspect. And they eventually found 58-year-old Tatsuko Horikawa, a homeless woman. She had been living in the home for a year. She was found not only in the closet, but on the top shelf of a closet. She had a mat to sleep on, and she had some drinking bottles, and they say she had just enough room to lay down. And she wasn't like your normal homeless woman. She was clean and well kept because she had been using his shower and taking care of herself. But she always made sure to clean up after herself and cover her tracks. So the only evidence that this guy had was the missing food. And how she got into the home is one day he had left his door open and she entered the house. And this was a year before. And she had stayed there ever since without leaving. With that being said, check your closets and check your attic.
Yeah, this is starting to seem way more common than you might think.
Well, when I was researching the case, and all I did was Google boyfriend living in closet, and I just got tons of responses because I knew about this case and I couldn't remember the names. So when I Googled it, I got a lot of them and had to sift through them. So I wanted to make sure that people knew, hey, you know, this case is pretty popular because of the location. It's a wealthy community and the guy was murdered. But do you know who's living in your closet? Go check.
So that's it for this week's case. And I want to give a special thank you to our superfan, Chad, and kind of get his take on it. How was it? Was it everything you thought it would be?
Oh, and then some. I've learned a lot about this process, and I appreciate y'all letting me come on here with you today. And I hope this in the last time that I'll get to be here and do this with you guys. I hope you'll have me back one day in the future. Seeing this stuff and seeing y'all work is really great, and I hope y'all keep producing more content for us.
Well, we plan to, and we appreciate you helping out with this week's case, and we appreciate all of our listeners like you who are devoted and listen every week. And as always,
we'll see you next week.
We would like to hear your thoughts on this and all of our cases, and as always, you can reach us by email at truecrimeoutloud@gmail.com, Facebook and Instagram at True Crime Out Loud. Out Loud is 2 words, not one, and Twitter at TC Out Loud.
Photos, links, and sources for this case can be found on our website at www.truecrimeoutloud.com.